Hello. Hi. Hello. Hi. Thumbs up if you can hear me. All right. Beautiful. Oh, no. Okay. So we're a couple of minutes before 2 o'clock, and I will begin picking up from where we left off last week and going a little further today with a discussion about designers in the theater, as well as the role of the critic, as well as the role that you guys are going to play as the audience. Okay? Keeping in mind that we say the art of theater happens with one actor and one audience member agreeing to willingly suspend their, say it, somebody. Go ahead. Yes. Disbelief, 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 disbelief. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope some of you have indicated some questions or challenges accessing the discussion questions and writing, submitting them to me in the text box that's available. I have recognized that I needed to check a couple of other locations, and I found them and was able to give credit in the discussion number 1. I will have discussion number 2 grades for you within the next day or 2. And today I will post discussion number 3. Then we won't have a discussion question for a couple of weeks. Okay? What we're going to get into next is a look at the structure of a play, how plays have different elements to them. We will also be looking at Greek theater and transitioning into our study of Oedipus. I will be posting the readings from the Hansen book related to that, and then you will need to make sure and get your copy of the Brockett book, Plays for the Theater, where you will find the Oedipus script. Now, the thing to know about Oedipus is that, it is translated in many different ways by many different people. So we will be using the translation in the Brockett textbook, Plays for the Theater. Okay? Good. So we're right at 2 o'clock. I want to begin. I want to welcome you. I guess we're in week number 4. Hard to believe we're almost a third of the way through this fall semester. I'm starting to recognize some of your faces. It's good to see you. You can mute your phone. Yeah, thanks. And then we do have the group chat up for the live discussion. So if an idea comes up, please jot it down. I will try to mention it. Sometimes we get a whole slew of different thoughts, and I'm not able to get to all of them. It may turn out today's Zoom discussion doesn't need a full hour, but it may. I'm not sure, but I've given a full hour to this, and I'll let you know if I think we can cut this off before 60 minutes. The other thing is, thumbs up if you've checked out the Zoom discussion as a YouTube, just to kind of refer. Thumbs up if you. So Giovanni, it worked for you. Good, that's good. I just want to make sure that people are able to access all this stuff. As I've mentioned before, new teaching experience for me, working with students only online. And so I'm trying my best to make sure that you feel connected and that you feel informed, and that the education that we're hoping to impart here in the study of theater is meaningful and fun and interesting and engaging. Okay, so if you look on Canvas today, I did post a couple of additional documents. And the first one having to do with acting areas, I thought would be a useful way for us to kind of start our conversation. So I'm going to refer to acting areas on stage and stage directions given by a director as a starting point, okay? And we have a shorthand. You'll see things like UR and UC and UL and CR and CS and CL and DR and DC and DL. These stand for very specific things. Some of you may know, right? Anybody want to write it in and take a guess what any of those UR, UC, UL, CR, CS, CL, DRs, DC, DL? Anybody want to write it in chat? What they think that is? What am I referring to there?
Yeah, this is the most convenient
areas. Just waiting to see if anybody wants to write in a chat response. Stage directions, Acela, correct. Yes, Roddy is referring to it as upper right. I call it upright, up center, up left, right? Up left, correct. And center right, center stage, right in the middle, center left, down right, down center, down left. These are classic stage areas that directors are able to provide to actors when they're doing something called blocking. Okay? And blocking is the movements of actors' entrances and exits from one space to another. And this is a very important part of the process. And so I've given you a document in Canvas called Acting Areas for a Proscenium Stage. And proscenium is the idea that I want to first discuss.
Well, I could, but I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to
talk about that last time. Please mute your, please mute any phones, devices, etc. Thanks. So when we talk about a proscenium stage, we're talking about a separation between the audience area and the acting area, right? And there's an invisible fourth wall in which the audience is looking through that invisible fourth wall to see the worlds of the actors, right? So directors direct, as we spoke about last time, typically from the audience perspective. They're the kind of surrogate for the audience. They're in place of the audience. They're anticipating an audience coming to watch this play. So they're staging actors. So you move up right and you cross down center. These movements have very specific compositional properties to them. And a director typically spends a lot of time thinking about that, or at least working on that with actors in rehearsal. As an architect, who we talked about last time as one of the principal theater designers, is designing that stage space, keeping in mind that an audience needs a clear view of the stage so that they can see all the things that are necessary and that they'll be able to hear as well. So when we get these blocking shorthand symbols like DC and CL, center left, down center, these are movement choices that actors will be given by a director, but they're also something that a theater designer an architect is keeping in mind, somebody who's designing that stage area and the audience area, and also a scenic designer has to keep in mind, as well as a lighting designer too. And we'll get into scenic and lighting in just a couple of minutes. When we talk about a thrust stage, that means audience on three sides. Okay, so a proscenium stage is one side is the actors, one side is the audience. In a thrust stage, we have audience on three sides. And that also is a choice that an architect might make, or an arena stage in which the audience is on all four sides. We often call that theater in the round. Okay? So these are stage areas, and they're acting areas that directors work with actors on, but the designers also need to be well informed and understand how these areas work. The theater building not only includes the acting and audience area, it also includes other spaces like the lobby area or rehearsal rooms, dressing rooms, bathrooms, certainly. There need to be areas where the stage manager and the board operators sit and call cues and execute cues during a show. There needs to be a backstage space. We call the wings, and you'll see that in your handout about acting areas. There's wings that are off-stage spaces to the left and right of the stage where actors can be off-stage and wait for their entrance. Okay, so wings has a very specific connotation or denotation, right? Clear, precise meaning in the theater. Additionally, in a theater building, there might be a scene shop where they build sets, and a green room, which is a waiting room area. There might be a prop storage area. There might be a costume shop, okay? And it just depends what the theater happens to be. Some theaters are small, and they just have barely enough space for a box office where they sell the tickets, a lobby, an audience space, a stage space, and a little backstage space, maybe a little dressing room. Here at CSUN, we have not only all of those things, but we additionally have administrative offices. We have a bunch of different rehearsal rooms. We have some really important areas for design work to take place as well. Any question, comment about the theater architect before we move into the scenic designer? Okay, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Remember, we're talking about 4 different designers in our study. We're talking about the theater architect, we're talking about the scenic designer, the lighting designer, and the costume designer. Don't want you to worry about the sound designer, even though the sound design is imperative and important, and it has made amazing strides in the last several decades as far as what sound designers are doing in theatrical productions. When we talk about the scenic designer, remember, all designers are creating environments, but the scenic designer specifically is creating the environment of the world of the play. So they're building or designing the sets. They're not building the sets, they're designing the sets. Sometimes if the play is a unit set, there's just one set for the whole show. The setting never changes. But in many productions, you'll see plays that call for multiple sets. So a scenic designer has to think transitionally. How do I move from an exterior scene outside, inside to a living room, then to another location, and it all has to happen boom, 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 boom. And oftentimes, a director and a scenic designer will consult, and they'll bring in the lighting designer too, because that might have to get affected by a lighting change as opposed to a set change. Remember, if we're moving sets around, that can take a lot of time, and transitioning is a very important part of what a director is thinking about. How do I move from one scene to the other as smoothly and as quickly and as imperceptibly as possible? So the scenic designer has to know the script, has to study the script. The scenic designer has to have a good background if the play is set in an historical period or in a different culture or different nationality. After a design concept is described, what a scenic designer will do is take those ideas, often in conversation with the director, and execute ground plans, which is a view of the stage from the ceiling, looking down. And I added a file for you to look at, an existing a ground plan in the Canvas site, so you guys should take a look at that too, okay? In addition to the ground plan, which looks down from the ceiling, a scenic designer is creating elevations. Elevations are looking from the audience perspective straight at the play. So you would want to see drawings of different structures from the ground up. I thought I had a nice picture to share with you, and I think I may have it sitting on my home computer, and I'll try to upload that to the Canvas site so you can see some examples of what a scenic designer does when she or he is creating an elevation. Okay, an elevation is seeing the set from the audience's perspective, how the audience will see it. Another thing that's really cool, and again, I'll try to add that as well sometime this week, is what we call a scale model. So I'm going to write these three things down: ground plan, elevation, scale model. This is scenic design, all right? Now, a scale model is really cool because they take, you know, little pieces and they create a false stage. Oh man, I used to have one. Thought I had one right here in my office. I do. Can you guys wait 1 second? Okay, thanks. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So this is a scenic model. I'm going to take, these are examples of set pieces and props. If you see this, what is that? It's a mini table and chair, right? Look at this. This is an example of a stage. These are where the audience area is, and this is the acting area. This is a flat indicating a wall. These are entrances and exits, okay? And then this becomes a platform. If you can see that, it's kind of hard to see. This thing right here, there's some steps right there. It becomes a platform. And then this becomes a house. See that? This was from a play that I did called The Immigrant several years ago, and it's a scale model. Okay, guys? Thumbs up if you get that. Scale model, all right? And this is a really helpful thing for the director and the actors to really understand on a small scale what the scenic designer is thinking about and how the scenic designer is going to create the world of the play on stage, okay? The scenic designer is creating the set pieces, right, and also the props. So this is a, I'll try to get that as close as I can. It's kind of hard to see that, but that's like this kind of cupboard thing. It's kind of hard to see, but anyway, the scenic designer is making designs for the set pieces and props. There might also be a prop master who works under the scenic designer's direction to build props. There's also a technical director who works with the scenic designer who executes the building of those set pieces and the building of the stage design for the scenic designer. Okay? These physical environments all have to they have to coordinate with the playwright's demands very carefully and with whatever vision the director has to take the play in a certain direction. I also included a couple pictures of Equus. I've been talking about Equus, right? Equus, the play by Peter Schaefer. How many of you saw those pictures? I put them up on Canvas today. Yeah, awesome. What's his name? Daniel Radcliffe, I think, is playing Alan Strang. Daniel played Harry Potter, right? Yeah, in the movie, yeah. So that was a really cool production of Equus, and you can see the scenic design is very simple. It's a square. It almost looks like a boxing ring, and it has a kind of emotional environment to it. If you recall, we've been talking about that play as an example of a psychiatrist guiding an audience into the world of a boy who has blinded 6 horses with a hoof pick, right? And it's his uncovering of the motivations and his understanding of the spiritual nature in which this boy was relating to horses almost like God figures, and that he does this terrible act of having sex in the stable, and because of that he wants God to see none of his awful behavior, and that's the primary reason that he goes on this rampage blinding the horses. So if you look at those pictures, we'll talk about costume design as well, but you'll also see a stage design that's very basic. It doesn't have a whole lot to it, but it actually speaks to the kind of box that this boy is in, right? And it speaks to an empty space that can be adapted and become a psychiatrist's office, can become a stable, can become an empty field where the boy rides the horses at night, okay? So that becomes really pivotal as far as the scenic designer's ability to provide the director and the actors with a stage space that adapts to each scene, and the scenes are very fluid and they move and they change very quickly. So that was a pretty brilliant idea by the original scenic designer, whose name I don't have to share with you, unfortunately. Okay, I want to move to the lighting designer. Is that okay? Thumbs up? Anybody questions about any of that? Okay, good. And again, I'll try to put up some of those pictures of elevations and scale models that I know I have somewhere, I think on my home desktop. But when we talk about the lighting designer, this is the newest of designs for the stage. Let's think about that. Electricity really comes into being with the advent of the light bulb, Thomas Edison, early 1900s. So prior to that, many plays did not take place during nighttime, or if they did, they were lit by torches, or they were lit by gas light, or they were lit by something called lime light. You ever heard that expression? Standing in the limelight, right? And lime is a mineral. It's a stone, limestone, and they would use that to somehow kind of very combustible. They could get light projected from limestone. But many fires, gaslight caused many fires in theaters, and they needed to get rid of that as soon as they could. And with the advent of electricity, electric light comes into being in the theater, and we start to see this new specialist emerge as a design emphasis in the theater. Lighting design has taken on so many beautiful and wonderful and exciting new dimensions, as we see, laser and holograms and other kinds of projection and multimedia, and it all kind of connects to the lighting designer's art. I want to indicate 5 primary goals. That's what I want you to be thinking about. 5 primary goals of the lighting designer. All right. The first being illumination. All right. What does it mean to illuminate something? It means to light it up, right? And in lighting it up, we can also think of the direction, whether it's coming from the front or from the sides or from behind or from above or even from below. They're illuminating. They're focusing light. Well, not focusing. I want to take that back. They're shining light dimensionally onto the stage. So illumination becomes the first primary goal focus becomes the second. Because if you think about it, you can have a pin spot just focused on my face, right? Or it can be a not so sharp, more of a fuzzy kind of focus that illuminates or lights up the whole stage space. So we have illumination, we have focus, we also have mood, okay? And when we talk about the mood, we're talking about the color. So if we're in a harsh red light, that's going to create an emotional response. If it's a deep blue, that might create an emotional response. Notice the time of day is not going to be listed as one of the primary goals, but the mood is often indicated, is an indication of the time and day that the lighting designer is attempting to portray for the set. So if it's Romeo and Juliet and Romeo has come to Juliet's balcony and we want moonlight, there might be some mood lights, some colored gels that give us that sense of blue, purple, dark night, right? Not, you know, ambers and yellows and daylight kinds of moods. Okay. Hi, Oscar. You can hear? Yes. Good. Thank you. I see you had some issues there. We have illumination. We have focus. We have mood. We have intensity. All right. When we say intensity, we're talking about the amount of light. And we can dim light. This is another way of indicating time of day. If it's a dark night, we can't see quite well. If it's a bright morning, the intensity is much greater and much more intense. Okay, it's the amount of light demanded by a scene is what we consider to be the intensity. And then lastly, we have effect. Oops, I spelled that wrong. There we go. Effect. The effect that a lighting designer can execute varies in many, many different ways. Sometimes they use something called a gobo. A gobo is this little wonderful piece of metal that they insert in front of a lighting instrument, and suddenly it can look like shadows and trees are being projected from maybe sunlight onto the stage. If we're in a church, for example, they might have a gobo of a crucifix or of some kind of altar behind. And this, again, is an effect that the lighting designer is creating. If it's a dance club, obviously, right, we have all sorts of effects, you know, from the what's the ball? I can't even think of the name of it. But, you know, shining all sorts of lights on. And again, these are lighting effects that a lighting designer can execute in creating the environment of the play, of the scene of the play, of the world of the play. So now, lighting designer at work, we talked about what the scenic designer does to create ground plans and elevations and scale models, to oversee the building, sometimes participate in the building and painting of a set. The lighting designer at work does something a little bit different, but starts in exactly the same way. They must read the script, and they read the script several different times with several different lenses attached to that. One being just to understand the play and understand the playwright's intention. And then maybe in discussion with the director to understand some of the directorial concepts that are being expressed. And the lighting designer then is reading the script again to just look and see where are the changes in light as they hit at different moments in the play. And the lighting designer will start literally making notes for him or herself to say, okay, this is a light cue. Okay, that's a light cue. Okay, this is a shift. This is a crossfade. This is a blackout. Okay, and these are all different types of terms that a lighting designer will need. Now, not only will the lighting designer figure out these ideas from reading the script, the lighting designer must attend rehearsal. at certain points. And she or he will check in with the director to find out, so when's a good rehearsal for me to come to and see what we call a run through, meaning we'll start the play and we'll go from beginning to end, so that the lighting designer can sit there with his or her script or just with a notepad and go, okay, light cue, okay, light cue right there, okay, this goes interior to exterior, okay, dot, 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 dot. And they start making their notes, they go back to the drawing board, and they start to build what is called a lighting plot, all right, which is different than the plot of a play, which we'll talk about next time. A lighting plot, and I've left a document for you on Canvas for you to actually see a lighting plot. But the lighting plot is a scale of the whole theater, the stage, but also the audience area, and it's typically looking down from above like a ground plan. But this is where they're going to actually draw the instruments that they're going to use. They're going to say, I need some color changers here, and I need some ellipsoidals there, and I need some strobes there. And they're going to look, do I need it anti-proscenium, meaning in front of the stage? Do I need it over, above the stage? Do I need footlights? Do I need side lights, backlights? And they'll actually plot this out in a map of the stage, which again you can check out on Canvas, so you can see a real lighting plot, and you can see where how they draw the instruments in, and oftentimes they focus them in certain directions. Now those focal points can change. They're not fixed, and sometimes that will get discovered in the hang and focus, which is another part of what the lighting designer does. But before we get to that, we also are drawing not only a lighting plot, but an instrument schedule. What's an instrument schedule? As I just mentioned, we need color changers, we need strobe, we need footlights, we need pin spots. And they actually make a list of all of the instruments, lighting instruments they're going to need, and then the producer will start laughing at them and go, only wish we could. But no, just kidding. Typically, they will already know what lighting instruments the theater possesses, and then the director or producer will say, we have a little rental budget as well, so you can get some toys. And those toys typically come from a rental shop. They'll bring in some fun lighting instruments. Sometimes it's not toys; it's some basic, LED lights that are going to help light up, illuminate the stage. I mentioned the hang and focus. This is when the real action begins on stage for the lighting designer. Why? Because now, working with a master electrician and a lighting crew, they come into the theater when nobody's in there, and they start hanging the lights according to that light plot, and they focus them. And the lighting designer is there and making sure that the focus is exactly what she or he wants. How open should the aperture be for that particular light? Should it be tight? Should it be open? These are all answers that are discovered or described by the lighting designer at the hang and focus. And typically that can take 1, 2, 3 days to accomplish. Now, while that hang and focus is starting, there's also what we call a paper tech or a dry tech, which occurs between the stage manager, the lighting designer, and typically the director too. And they go through the script from page 1 all the way to the end of the play, and they make sure that all the cues, the light cues, are written. And then the lighting designer will make sure that she or he is building that light cue as they want it to be built. It could mean 5 lights in the anti-proscenium, meaning over the audience, shining down on the front of the stage, 3 lights on the left and the right, 2 lights overhead for light cue 1.2. And then light cue 1.7 adds a backlight or a spotlight. And again, these are all things that get figured out after the paper tech, after the hang and focus, as they're working out all of the specific cues in rehearsal. If you remember, we talked about the tech rehearsal, that the director gets to then integrate all of the design elements. And this is a key moment when the lighting designer really is not only reshaping, but also sometimes building light cues. That's where things can take forever, because the actors have to stop. The lighting designer is literally punching in. It's all computerized now, so they can punch in. I want this light, this light, this light. Take that light out, and now I have cue number 6.4. Okay? Got it? Everybody, lighting designer, we're good there. Good. Let's move to the costume designer, who is basically charged with figuring out the clothing that needs to be worn by the characters, the actors playing the characters on stage. What's critical for the costume designer is to know the period of the play, which is the time, the era, right? So they have to be researchers and historians. They need to know if there's some kind of rank between them, like status, high class, low class, if there's military officers or any distinctions between these characters, because all of these will determine the dress and clothing that these characters are going to be putting on. Now, in addition to clothes, they have accessories like fans and wigs and mustaches and eyeglasses, and sometimes even some of the properties that are considered costume props, like a wallet or a flask, something like that a character uses in the play. Those are costume props that are the costume designer's responsibility sometimes. Sometimes they're given to the prop master, and that's, again, a decision that gets worked out in production meetings between the designers and the director and the stage manager, and everybody's usually very agreeable about that. And sometimes there are disagreements, but it all gets worked out in the end. Okay. Yeah, sometimes there are weapons that, like in Romeo and Juliet, we did sword and dagger in one production I did as Mercutio that was awfully fun. And we have to have backup props sometimes, especially in the case of swords. And I'll share with you one funny story. If you've read Romeo and Juliet, you know that Mercutio and Tybalt have this terrible fight, right? Where Romeo comes in between and kills them, right? So I'm doing sword and dagger with Tybalt, right? And the actor playing, yes, thanks, Oscar. You can keep fencing with me. So our first parry and thrust, and guess what happens to Tybalt's sword? It breaks. It breaks from the scabbard and the blade. And it actually goes in the audience, and thank goodness nobody got hurt. But now Tybalt's standing there without a sword. How am I going to die? And the actor playing Tybalt did a great job, because he saw Benvolio, who's actually my friend, Mercutio's friend, and he ran over and he literally grabbed Benvolio's sword and came back, and fight went on, and I got stabbed at the exact proper location. But the face of that actor, I'll never forget, when his sword broke, and what are we going to do now? And that's, again, where actors always have to be thinking on their feet. But thankfully there was a solution very nearby. If you look at those Equus pictures again, you'll see the horse heads and the hooves, and you'll see the way in which the costume designer renders those really interesting horse characters. Now, typically at work, the costume designer will do drawings first. They call them plates or sometimes palettes. They'll do measurements at maybe the first reading, so they know exactly what to do. Sometimes there will be a costume storage like we have at CSUN, where the designer can go up and actually find the costumes right here in our costume storage. Other times they have to build them. They have to make them from scratch. Other times they have to rent them. And sometimes they have to go and buy stuff. Typically when they buy stuff, costume designers are amazingly resourceful people. I'm always so impressed how they figure out how to make people look so beautiful, because remember, it's the pretense. It's a creative lie. They don't actually have to be, these fancy, really expensive garments. They just have to look fancy and expensive. So quite often, costume designers will spend a lot of time in thrift stores finding some really great old stuff and then working them out. Okay. Any questions so far? If you want to ask a question, you want to turn your mic or to turn your mute off so you can speak, that's fine too. Does anybody want to say anything? We're all good? Are we going to talk about projection designers, Kevin asked. We won't, Kevin. It's a new part of the design field. It often has been in the realm of the lighting designer, but now production design, multimedia has become its own design capacity. And in today's world of theater, we're seeing more and more really innovative projections and actual animation, film that integrates with the production. And that is an artist in his own right. But I do want to stick, I guess, with, disco ball, Roddy. Thank you. I saw that a while ago. That's right. So Kevin asks a very important question, because we are seeing more and more plays where there are projections, and that is something that is really sophisticated, and it's a new design field in the theater that will keep emerging. Okay, and as I mentioned, sound design too. When you go to a movie, listen to the underscore music. That's something that we didn't usually see accompanying stage plays, for example. But now we have, ambient sound and music that might go on for 30 minutes, and it just becomes part of the aural field, not the visual field, but the aural field that informs the environment of the play. So sound designers are making a really exciting and interesting contribution to the design elements. Okay, so I'd like to move on, if I can, to the subject of the critic. The critic has a very important function. Believe it or not, and this comes, I think, directly from your text, the function of the critic is to enrich the theater experience of the audience. Okay, to enrich the theater of the experience of the audience. You might find that ironic when a theater critic is totally like destroying a production and saying how awful it is and how terrible the acting is and how awful the direction of the script is. How is that enriching the theater experience? Well, that's a good question. The way I would answer that is that their opinion is going to help audience members know whether or not they should take the time, invest the money, and come and see this production. So there's a very specific role that a critic plays. Now, I want to identify two different types of critics. I'm going to write it down in the chat. There's a drama critic and a theater critic. All right? The drama critic is not looking necessarily at a specific production. Like we're going to go see Living Out, and you're going to be a theater critic there. You're going to review that particular performance on that particular day you go see it, and that is a theater critic. A drama critic is really looking at maybe the historical aspects, or they are talking about the style of that type of style of the play. They're talking about the evolution of the art form. Okay, so it's more It's more generalized. Okay, it's more generalized. All right. The theater critic, which is what we're mostly focused on, is the one who is going to the production and writing a review on it and either posting it online or in a newspaper or speaking about it on television or radio. That theater critic is playing a very important role because they have a lot of power. Their opinion has real weight. And that, like I said before, can influence an audience to determine, you know what, I'm not going to that show. That critic really wrote a scathing review. Okay? That's an important part of the feedback. And I would consider that, and your book does as well, to be actor-audience interaction. The critic is going as an audience member. They are indirectly influencing the production. How indirectly? Because they might clap, that's a direct response to it, but indirectly because they see the production, then a couple of days later they write a review about it. Does that make sense between the direct versus indirect influence of a critic / audience? Okay? When we say direct influence, they're laughing, they're clapping, they're sleeping, they're talking, they're disinterested, they're walking out. That's direct. Indirect happens later. It's not an immediate reaction to it. Sometimes that indirect influence can happen before the play has even performed. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes when I get to the audience. But for the critic, the indirect influence is the review that happens just after the play has been viewed by the critic, and then they take the time to reflect on it and write about it. They need to have a responsible attitude. They need to be aware socially of the questions that are being posed by this play and this production. They need to be well read and even philosophical about it. So it is an important role in a lot of ways that is very, very informative as far as how successful a theater production might be. Now, a theater critic should distinguish between a professional production and an amateur production or a student production, right? They're two different things. And it's vital that a critic writes from that point of view of, this is a professional production. At the Mark Taper Forum, it should have been much better. It felt like I was watching a high school show. Okay, there's two different things. That high school show was as good as anything I've ever seen on the professional stage. And I mean it, right? And that happens too, believe it or not. Like in the movies, that thumbs up or thumbs down by a critic can really be a key to whether or not the theater sells tickets. So a critic becomes a consumer advocate, and that too is an important role. I'm going to write that down. Consumer advocate. All right. You're going to see that I ask you to really think about criticism of a play in three ways, okay? And this comes from a great German playwright and drama critic and theater critic named Goethe. Okay, Goethe asked you to do two things as a critic: to gauge the artistic intention, okay? What were the artists trying to do with this production? Then to distinguish between the playwright's intention and the director's intention. Okay, that's number two. Go back and write. Oh, I can't do that. And then that was number two. And now number three, get that, there we go. Number three, the last, is to say, was it successful and why? Was it worth Was it worth the time? Was it worth the time to sit there in the theater? So for example, we're going to go see Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Right? Now some of you might be going, why are we going to see a play about two characters from Hamlet that don't even really matter that much? They're just two of his friends, and they just come in and they end up getting killed. I'm not giving anything away. Remember, the title of the play is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. So I'm not, there's no spoiler alert there. Why would this playwright write this? And that's going to require some research and reading, because it's an older play now. How did this production interpret it? Why? Why did they do things the way they did? Was it successful? Was it worth doing this play at this time? Maybe it was worth doing 30, 40 years ago, but today, is it still worth doing? These are the sort of questions I'm going to be asking you to consider as we see Living Out and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Okay? So, enriching the theater experience for the audience. That's the key function of a critic. Now we'll talk about the audience, and that's you. All right? The audience has a number of ways in which it is defined. Okay? The audience is defined by their age, by their sex, by the time of day that they're attending a play, by their familiarity with each other. We'll talk about these in a second. By the leaders in the audience. Okay? They're also influenced by the news of the day, by their theater going experience. So let's just break this down. If we're doing a play, and I'll share this with you, we would do a show on an evening, and it would be received fabulously. We had a wonderful audience, and then we would do a show Sunday afternoon matinee, and it would be quiet, and it wouldn't be very responsive, and we called it the blue hair performance. Roddy, what do you think? What's blue hair? What's blue hair? Who's got blue hair? Elderly women sometimes are famous for going to the hairdresser, and they get their silver locks kind of dyed, and it somehow turns blue. So it's a funny way. It's an endearing way of responding, not a critical way. But the age of the audience matters. If there are kids at a performance, sometimes the play might be too sophisticated for them. So the age of that audience member matters. The gender matters too. If the play, is, I don't know, if the play has more appeal to one gender or another, if it's a transgender play, if it's an LGBT play, this could matter a lot to how an audience receives this particular production. The time of day, as I mentioned before, also matters. So let's think about that. Friday night, are people generally going to work on Saturday morning? No. Saturday night, right? They're not going to work on Sunday. So they'll come to a show and they'll be raucous and they'll be having a great time. Why? Because they went to dinner and had some drinks beforehand and they're feeling good, right? That said, on a Thursday night, people are going to work Friday morning, so they may be more sober and more alert, and they're there because it's not just to get entertained, but it's for some maybe edification. They really want to be there to receive the play. Okay. When we talk about familiarity, when you are sitting at a CSUN student production, the likelihood is you may know some of the students sitting near you and around you, and that you may know some of the actors on stage. That actually shifts how an audience responds to a play. Okay? Also, we talk about leadership. If you notice, and certain comedies, there'll be some people who laugh very loud. And when people start laughing, other people feel maybe a little safer and more welcome to join in the laughter. So that leadership of certain audience members, and it's not spelled out in advance, okay, I'm the audience leader. When I laugh, you can laugh. No, it doesn't happen like that. But certainly there's an unspoken thing that goes on where you may see audience members suddenly laughing uproariously because a couple of individuals have really set that. It happens all the time too in standing ovations. There'll be a couple of audience members that stand up. You weren't thinking you were going to give a standing ovation, but everybody else is standing up, and now you are too. Raise your hand if that's happened to you. You've given a standing ovation when you didn't think maybe the play necessarily deserved one. The news of the day is also an interesting idea. After 9/11, they shut down the theaters in Broadway and the bombings at the World Trade Center in New York City. When those theaters reopened, there was a real amazing community experience. I wasn't there, but I read about this and heard about this, and that impacted how people were viewing these plays, that we needed to keep making theater happen because we had been attacked and our country was trying to find its bearings again. So the news of the day oftentimes has a real impact as well. Lastly, when talking about the theater going experience, what we mean by that is that if the audience, understands this type of play, or, if you're at a Shakespearean production and you kind of get the sense that people really are following along, they're laughing at jokes that you're going, why are they laughing? It may be because they've studied Shakespeare before. They're like you're reading Hamlet and they know who Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are. They're more informed than maybe an uninformed audience member just coming to see the play for the first time. Okay? There are two demands that are put upon the audience, and I mentioned them before, in relation to the critic. But that's I'm sorry. No, actually, let me change that. I'm going to get to direct versus indirect. I want to talk about the idea of representational versus presentational. Okay, so this has to do with something we talked about last time, the fourth wall, right? Everybody remembers the fourth wall? If we break the fourth wall and we're talking directly to the audience, that's considered presentation. Acknowledging the audience. If the actors are pretending there's an invisible wall and we're not looking or thinking that anybody's watching us, that's considered representational. Okay? Does that make sense? So representational is keeping that fourth wall up, and the audience, it's a convention, right? And the audience presumes that they're just like peeping toms. They're watching the action of the play in darkness. They're not being asked to be acknowledged or recognized. Whereas a presentational performance or demand convention is one that assumes the presence of the audience and it's built into the action of the play. So those are two modes, okay? Presentational, representational. Can both exist in a play? Yes or no? Yes. Elise is right. Edwin's right. You can have presentational, you can have representational. Okay? So we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to finish up talking about audience skills. First of all, concentration, right? It's not like a TV show. There's no commercials. Typically, you don't want to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of a play. Why? Because you have to get up and interrupt people sitting there watching. You definitely don't want to be texting. No texting. Got that? I hope that scared you. Because we really frown on that. We really don't want anybody, certainly from CSUN Theater Department, going to a play and texting during the play. no eating. You can drink some water. Sometimes they'll say unwrap your candies if you've got a cough or a sore throat. Okay. Thank you, Asela. Perception becomes another really important part of the audience skill. Not only paying attention, but knowing where to focus on stage. Think about it. A movie shows you exactly where to focus. It's a close-up on the guy's face. Now it opens up, and what is it? It opens up to include his cell phone. Okay, and then it opens wider, and we see behind him all these things in his office. Okay, and all these papers all over the place. Right. So the focus becomes an important part of an audience member, to know where to look and to know when to look. Because remember, an audience can see and hear everything. You can choose to look wherever you want to during a play. A good production will help you keep focus, but you also, as an audience member, will develop strong perception. Open-mindedness is another skill. I think all of these are listed in your book. Fight any bias you might have. Set aside opinions you might have before going in, and try to just be open-minded to the experience you're about to have in the theater. That's a really key idea. Imagination is, of course, the key, and we've talked about that with regard to the willing suspension of disbelief. Your ability to transform that empty space into a stable or a psychiatrist's office or a movie theater or a bedroom. This is all from the play of Equus. And there's a bare stage. That becomes really critical work for you as the audience. Your emotional responsiveness, too, is really key. And the key word there is empathy. I'm looking for definitions. Whoever wants to write down a definition of empathy, I'm looking forward to that. I will demonstrate, because that's the other thing that an audience does. The demonstrative quality of applause and laughter, etc., is another skill. What is empathy? What is empathy? Somebody please write about it, because it is the key to our experience in the theater. Understanding, yep. Thank you. What else? Understanding somebody else and what they're going through. Excellent, Elise. Thank you. Feeling for someone, not you. Excellent. Thank you, Fiona. And the ability to share the feelings of others. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Excellent. Emotions. Good. Anyone else want to join in? Okay. Yeah, what they said. Thanks, Oscar. It's the thing that makes people cry during a sad movie. Yeah, I think that's right. So we're going to talk about the direct versus indirect influence of an audience on a theater performance. So I'm directing a play, right? And I'm thinking about, at rehearsal, what an audience is going to think at this particular moment, okay? And Elise, you've written something beautiful. I'll read that in a moment as a final thought here. But imagine this. We haven't even started performing the play, but the audience is already influencing the director and the actor in rehearsal. No, we shouldn't do it that way. They'll never get it. Oh, that's over the top. Oh, this is perfect. They're totally going to love that, right? We're talking as if an audience is going to be responding in a certain way. So the audience that doesn't even exist yet is influencing the choice making of the production team. Make sense? That's what I would call indirect influence. As we've said over and over, the direct influence is that, and laughter, and standing ovation, and sleeping. Those are direct. Another indirect happens afterward when who? The critic writes the review, right? So that's an indirect influence. Okay. Elise wrote about empathy, understanding how they see the world. It's different from sympathy because it's more active than feeling something for another person. It's the ability to relate and fully comprehend another person's struggles. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. Thank you, Roddy, for your applause. That's direct influence to Elise's Elise's definition. You guys, I hope this has been a helpful session. Thumbs up if it was helpful for you. It's good that you're tuning into this. I'm glad to see you. Okay. I will also get this up on YouTube. All right. And I will also have a discussion question for you in the next couple of hours. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to sign off now. Everybody, bye-bye.